So, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here. I love UC Riverside. I love this community. I want to thank Marian and David for inviting me here. And so I just want to share with you a little bit about kind of what my objectives with this seminar are. And I actually welcome questions, but I know David said that we should wait till the end. But I really just want to share with you guys some very practical experiences. For me, in terms of my journey, I did stay in education for a very long time. I did, get my doctorate and everything, but I'm a very applied-oriented person. And so the way I wanted to frame this conversation is really around, here's some issues that really moved me personally, that made me want to engage in the community and in the public space. And here are tangible initiatives that actually help try to make some kind of a meaningful difference in some kind of small way. And I really want to emphasize the initiatives themselves so that you guys can have a sense of real world applications and practice to making public policy in action. So that's really the spirit and intent behind it. It's meant to be very practical, and it might seem like some of the things I talk about are very hard to relate to each other. One's like on economic development, one's on housing, one's on education. But I think as you guys, as some of you that are in public policy or follow public policy know, issues are so interrelated, and all of these things really do have some guiding principles around equity that I think those are the kind of themes that really inspire and move me as a person. And I have to say this because for me, this is like one of the biggest honors of today, is the fact that my mentor, Penny Newman, I've known her since I was in high school. The fact that she's here really means a lot to me. She is for those of you that don't know, she is a pioneer and a champion of environmental justice. She's based in Grupa Valley, which is my hometown, but her impact has been felt throughout the whole country. So I really want to thank Penny for that. So I mentioned, I want to get through these public policy initiatives framed around some of these social issues, and I really want to emphasize more so on the process and experiences to implement those projects. And then I'm going to close with some lessons learned, just some very general parameters, and then I can get into more details based on what you guys want to discuss. So here are the topics that I'm going to go over. So the first one is the Great Recession housing crisis. This actually has to do with my doctoral dissertation. When I was studying at USC, I focused on actually implementing my dissertation in distressed communities. So I want to share with you guys just the process and how that came about. I'm very concerned about the economic development future of this region. As somebody growing up here, I don't want this region to be known as purely the warehouse capital of the world. I think there's a lot of things that we can do that are aspirational, realistic things, based on sound strategy and coordination. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do about that, and specifically the center at UCR that's geared towards doing some small but meaningful things locally in the community. Innovation ecosystem. David mentioned I studied at UC Berkeley for my undergrad. That's where I really got exposed a lot to the innovation ecosystem. My networks of alumni and friends during that time, a lot of them are in the Silicon Valley industry and the tech industry. So I got really exposed to that, and I think there's a place for that in the Inland Empire. And I want to share with you guys some tangible initiatives. We've set up a technology accelerator here in downtown Riverside, and I'll get into that in terms of what we're doing to make an impact on that. And then lastly, which this probably is my most passionate issue, which is being on the school board. And we have a couple of people, our chief academic officer and our assistant superintendent and others here from our school district. But I want to talk a little bit about how that's been a very meaningful platform to advance equity and make an extraordinary difference with our next generation, which is really the most important thing. So these are the four issues that I'm going to get into, and then again, I'm happy to answer questions. So, David mentioned a little bit about my background, so I won't, regurgitate some of the same things. But the one thing I really want to highlight more so is at the very top. I'm very proud to be born and raised in the Inland Empire, and I think this region has tremendous potential, and it doesn't need to be in the context of, in the shadows of LA, Orange County, and San Diego. On its own regard, the people here, the community, the cultural potential here, it can be a driving force for our state and our country. And so that's something that really moves me a lot. And so many of my classmates that I went to Rupa Unified School District growing up there, that I went to school with, they, including my own sisters, I have two younger sisters, they started here, but they leave, and they don't find a reason to come back. And going back to here with this technology incubator, part of the things that I'm very conscious about is what kinds of efforts can we be doing to foster a more attractive, dynamic environment, socially, economically, for young people to want to thrive and call this place their home long term, to want to retire there, which is what my goal is. My mom has really been the greatest and most impactful person in my entire life, period. I'm assuming she's having trouble finding parking, but she's going to be coming here too. But my mom is the sweetest person. She used to even work for Penny for a brief time. She is an immigrant. She came to this country with my dad. They didn't last very long in terms of their marriage, and my mom was very resilient, put her entire focus on me and my younger sisters, on raising us. And she worked at an assembly line Maglite flashlight company, and making like $14,000 a year, raising my two younger sisters and I. So we lived in a mobile home park at one point. We moved around a lot. We had a lot of challenges, but I'll tell you, the impact that she instilled in me, and from a values perspective, is by far the biggest driver towards everything that you hear today, and things I do in life are really centered around that. And especially on the education front, that's why I'm very passionate about making sure other people that come from underprivileged immigrant families, they have the same opportunities as well. So I wanted to show you guys just a very quick video. So I'm sure you couldn't hear that well, but that video is a small trailer of a local PBS documentary that was based on my doctoral dissertation. And the way this came about was, in 2008, I just got accepted to USC's Doctorate of Policy Planning and Development program. And I'm sure we all remember very vividly the banks collapsing, the housing crisis, and just the profound impact that was having on the entire world. I was very moved by what was happening, particularly because the Inland Empire was kind of a hero for this issue. And I saw so many people I know and cared for being affected by this. The predatory lending that was disproportionately targeting minorities and people from low-income families. There was just a preponderance of a lot of different issues plaguing society during that time. I wanted to do my dissertation on something meaningful, something that would not just be something that would be published and researched and sit on a shelf, but something that could immediately be deployed to trying to help the community while the dissertation is being done. Because my, a doctorate takes potentially 6-7 years. The housing crisis would be over by then, and what relevance would it have if there's anything even worthwhile that was researched in the dissertation to begin with, right? And so, for me, I wanted to, while I'm doing the research, go into the neighborhoods and try to develop a model that could be implemented in some of the most distressed communities. And I focused it around the city of San Bernardino, just because even within the Inland Empire, that was kind of ground zero for a lot of these issues. So I went into the west side of the neighborhoods, went to people's homes. I want to emphasize, I did all this as a student. There's no economic motivation or anything. This is purely as a student. I wanted to align something I had to do to get my degree with doing something that would also try to make an impact. Since I'm going to do it anyway, you might as well do it for something that will be impactful. So the way that this came about was really innocuous. I didn't know what impact it would mean. I didn't know if the research was going to mean anything. But it starts with listening, right? It starts with going into the neighborhoods, understanding what people are feeling, what's happening on the ground. And while this was happening, I was following very closely and this was, the transition was happening between the Bush administration and the Obama administration, following the public policy responses to this issue, and trying to reconcile these different things. My dissertation is called Private Partnership for Public Benefit. The whole basis of this is how can you align the market to make a social impact. What I was looking at from the government side was there was a very strong sense of kind of a save our souls mentality, SOS mentality. And that's why the documentary is called SOS, where people felt like they were victims and they wanted the government to do something about it. And the reality is that these neighborhoods didn't have the luxury to wait around for the government. The bureaucracies involved with HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, to try to deploy resources which were highly inadequate for the scale of the need. These were things that required immediate responses. So I started working with nonprofits. The main one in particular is Homestrong USA, which provides HUD-approved counseling, and they're headquartered in Rancho Cucamonga in San Bernardino County. I still actually serve as the chairman of their board, so I still stay involved, but my role obviously has dramatically shifted now that the housing crisis is over. But the idea was, let's develop a nonprofit, private lending-based community stabilization model that hopefully can be even more effective than the HUD neighborhood stabilization program, which was funded through taxpayer resources in terms of more impactful. But at a minimum, I wanted it to, from an expediency standpoint, from a time standpoint, we wanted to make the impact as quickly as possible. But so the model was very straightforward. How can you take a nonprofit, get a private lending for the nonprofit, acquire blinded foreclosures, rehabilitate them with energy efficiency. You guys all believe in climate change here? So this is actually a slight silver lining if done properly, in the sense that our biggest challenge when it comes to dealing with issues like climate change is the existing stock, the existing fuel efficiency of cars, the existing technology, the homes, right? They're not, we have to reach thresholds of emissions levels back from like 1990, and we have to do that while factoring in population growth. So the only way to really meaningfully do that is you have to affect the existing housing stock. So part of the strategy here was the foreclosures could be an opportunity to start doing things right that weren't originally built that way, right? So let's start putting in energy efficiency. Let's start putting sustainability into the existing housing stock. So I think that was a very positive thing. A big aspect of what led to the crisis was the predatory nature of lending, which is just horrible, and that's a whole nother lecture can be done on that. But we wanted to ensure that everybody who's buying a home has gone through HUD-approved counseling so that the issue doesn't repeat itself. Very important. And then the other unique feature of this program that was kind of different than what HUD was looking at was we wanted to look at things from a neighborhood block perspective. So what we found is that, one, objectively speaking, the foreclosure crisis has a profound impact on the surrounding community, right? I mean, whether you are paying your mortgage in a sustainable position or not, if your neighbor is foreclosed upon, that blight is going to impact your property values. Potentially, somebody could be coming in if it becomes abandoned with meth labs or all kinds of negative impact and consequences. So it's directly in your best interest to be concerned about the entire neighborhood beyond, and obviously this is kind of a metaphor for how we should be approaching the world, in the context of a lot of things. But at a minimum, I wanted to make this very local and very impactful. So the neighborhood block approach, what we did was we actually started having neighbors in communities like San Bernardino start talking to each other. We had people that had been living together, next to each other for like 20, 25 years, 30 years, never spoken to each other, had a real conversation, right? And what we found is that this started strengthening the very civic fabric of the community, so that when you're dealing with challenges, the sense of resilience, you're building in resiliency into the neighborhoods and the communities, because there's so many synergies of how they can be helpful to each other and help ensure from an education standpoint that they get the support that they need to be successful. So it was a beautiful thing that video you saw, this all kind of happened in a very organic, and in retrospect, it's very hard to fathom how all the dots connected, but USC played a very big role, an outsized role in giving me these opportunities. Tremendous mentorship from faculty, and when I had my doctoral committee, one of my committee members was from the Annenberg School of Communication, and so she was connected to like PBS and different things like that. So she wanted to document this project, and so it ended up becoming a documentary, and you guys can watch the whole thing. That's just a clip of it. But really, what happened is, we didn't know what we were documenting. We thought, okay, we're documenting something that's happening in a very localized fashion. It's just a pilot to test something that can prove this concept, hopefully. And if this could be disseminated nationally, people could adopt this in the neighborhood block approach and make a difference. That was the hope. But once the process started happening, things started really evolving. And Homestrong USA ended up adopting this concept and going national with it, stabilizing over 1,000 foreclosures across the country. So extraordinary impact. It led on some very significant national stages, which again, USC was very instrumental in facilitating. Here's some photos going into the neighborhoods, working with community stakeholders, listening to what the families want. But what really was very apparent, though, very early on, was that the neighbors really didn't feel sorry for themselves. They had a lot of pride. They want to do something about it. They didn't want to wait around for the government. And that's why the name of the documentary was SOS, which, again, connotates Save Our Souls. But we said we're going to redefine SOS to mean something proactive like sustaining our society. And that was the whole concept behind it. So, and the people really bought into it. They transformed the neighborhood block. And again, nationally, Homestrong was able to make a significant impact. I'm still somewhat stunned by how far this ended up all these efforts ended up going. I ended up having an opportunity to speak at national HUD conferences, and we ended up getting a meeting with Chairman Bernanke, at the time the Federal Reserve Chair, and influencing very significant policies like the HUD's Neighborhood Stabilization Program, Treasury's Hardest Hit Fund, and which I'm going to go into now. But all of this, I really want to emphasize is none of this was planned. And a lot of times, and I know there's some of you are students here in the audience, we get too bogged down about, okay, to get from from A to Z, it requires some enormous uphill battle and all these challenges. But sometimes you just have to go where your passion is taking you and to see where it takes you. Because honestly, if I could have thought of the ideal situation of how all this could have come about, it would have fallen far short of the actual result. The biggest impactful thing, even though the volume of impact was significantly less, is really the homeowner preservation model. And Emmanuel Saparzadeh, he's here now. He's my business partner now, and we met through this initiative. He comes from a finance background. We looked at, okay, it's fine to do something about the foreclosures, right? These are blighted properties. We're finding a model. How do we stabilize these neighborhoods? It's very impactful. It's important work. But simultaneously, what can we be doing to prevent the problem from happening in the first place? How do we prevent the foreclosures? This is the model we did. I wish we could have done more than what we did. We worked on a pool of 287 non-performing loans. I wish we could have done thousands, to be honest with you, but nonetheless, we did do something here. It made an impact. The loans were spread out over 40 states. And the whole approach with this is we worked with the leadership of a group called Sequoia Equities to put up the financial capital. And the idea was acquiring distressed mortgages and then restructuring them so that families could stay in their home. And when I talk about acquiring distressed mortgages, I'm talking about imminent foreclosure. I mean, in places like Detroit, areas where, like, essentially, if we hadn't bought them, the foreclosure rate was going to be like 99% or approaching that number. I mean, these were like, some of them had been defaulted like 2 years. And that's the state that we're buying these mortgages in. And so this was a very innovative concept that aligned with the U.S. Treasury's Hardest Hit Fund. It was highly successful. I think like 85% or so of the mortgages, we were able to restructure them where families could stay in their home. Very significant. And even the people who couldn't, we then tried to work with them on the approach of this program so that they could hopefully get a soft landing or transition. But to be honest with you, the ones that we couldn't help, it really wasn't a matter of that we couldn't help them. It was that they had already checked out. Like, they physically had given up, they had moved away, and there was no way to reach them. That's really the reality of it. But nonetheless, we tried to do what we could. And the Treasury's Hardest Hit Fund, which was really geared towards federal subsidies on encouraging people to stay in their homes. And so we worked with that policy on that effort. So this is something that I think was very, it really changed me a lot as a person, this experience. Dedicated several years of my life to it. And the stories, the families, we got letters, people wrote to us from all over the country telling us their experiences. Totally changed my whole perspective on life. And I am grateful to all so many people involved. My wife, Vessi, who's here, I actually met her during this time. And it's a funny story because she was working in Los Angeles, and I'm telling her, you know, I'm going to San Bernardino, and I'm going to be in these neighborhoods, and we're going to be doing this stuff. And she comes with me, and she was going door to door with me, and you know, that's actually how we started. I don't know if we were really dating, but we really connected during that experience, and she's in the documentary also. So this, in many ways, I mean, Emmanuel's like a brother to me, and I met my wife indirectly through this effort also. This experience really has stayed with me my whole life, and I'm obviously grateful to everyone that was involved. I'm going to switch gears now on economic development. So I genuinely wanted to stay away from discussing Trump in the presentation itself. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have on it. But on Earth Day, just 2 days ago, he tweeted something, and I felt I had to put that into this presentation. So I'm not even going to read it. You guys can read it. But the reason I did put this in the presentation, because I mean, obviously there's a ton of things I could talk about with these different tweets and different messages. But the reason I put this in is because I think fundamentally this is a narrative that we hear quite too often. That one is that the economy and the environment are mutually exclusive things, or that the economy drives the environment, and that which implies that our basis of our existence, right, is really centered around economic productivity and jobs and so forth. I mean, regardless of what your position on him is, I strongly disagree with this premise. I think it's the other way around. I feel like it's our values and our environment and science that needs to be the framework upon how we should construct public policy towards jobs. And this is particularly important because I feel like this is the major battleground that the Inland Empire is facing right now. And I'm not here to disparage specific industries. I mentioned logistics earlier. I'm not trying to characterize the entire industry as not being having any value in society. Obviously, our regional dynamics, being connected with the ports of LA and Long Beach, the trade corridors. I mean, it would be very short-sighted of me to imply that that industry does not have a very significant role in this region. However, I think the key is what is driving the decisions, and ultimately what are our metrics on how we want to be judged in terms of our quality of life. I think that ultimately is the key. And so these are the kinds of, and this is something I mean, this is not meant to be comprehensive by any means, but these are some guiding principles that I wanted to draw attention to in terms of what are our values. It has to start with that. And a lot of times, I hear about, from an economics perspective, that the market on its own will correct and it will take into account inefficiencies and these things that we're talking about, whether it's dealing with social and environmental issues. And I'll tell you that, at what cost, and also I will say, is the economy and the market factoring in all of the information and the variables in its marketplace? And so what I mean by that is, what I really mean, from a practical standpoint, are the environmental and social costs associated with those economic activities factored into the costs and transactional nature of this business? That is really the fundamental question. And if it is, I actually think naturally our society would be operating in a much more efficient manner. But if it's not, which I believe in our society it's currently not, then the government has to play a role among civic and champions like Center for Community Action, Environmental Justice, to help bridge that gap of information on how these marketplace transactions are being conducted, right? And the part of the thing is, people will come up with all kinds of theories that we should be like this next Silicon Valley, or they'll come up with different things. On the other end of the spectrum, we have to caution that economic development vision has to be grounded on a basis of what are your assets from a workforce and regional sense, right, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the labor pool, so forth. So there has to be something that is logical. I'm not somebody who believes that whatever the current situation is, that we should purely play to what the current situation is, which is, over 80% of population in the Inland Empire does not have a bachelor's degree. And so I'm not necessarily advocating that everybody needs to be working, again, in warehouse and so forth, but that's the only option we have. There should be an aspirational quality to something that we should strive to achieve. But it needs to be grounded within a context, a strategic plan that involves, these are our existing assets, this is our goals, and this is realistically how we can get there. That kind of thought process, I feel like it needs to happen more among local policymakers. Unfortunately, what I feel like happens too often is that the very fact of having economic activity is driving the decision making. And the void of economic activity is seen as something that's inherently a bad thing. And at the end of the day, everybody needs livable wages. People need sustainability. People need to be able to have their own livelihood. Absolutely. So this is not obviously meant to be construed as something where I'm pushing for more social dependency or anything of that sort. It's purely a matter of how we frame our economic opportunities. But the key is, this bottom portion here, is that it needs to be framed around livable wages. It needs to be framed around rights of workers, collective bargaining. It needs to be framed around career pathways. So even if a job has opportunities, we want to create pipelines where people can start at one level, but they have somewhere to go from there. And I serve on the governor's workforce development board, and we have about almost $500 million, which with the next budget, I'm not sure what it's going to be, to fund job training efforts. And specifically, we have resources to do these things. And there's too many people who don't know about them. But we can subsidize potentially on-the-job training for people to get to work and learn what they're, the skills of the job while they're getting paid. There are opportunities, but again, the way that these organizations are constructed, these are boards, they're private sector driven. So majority of the representation is private sector. The career pathways that we choose to fund are driven based on the board, hopefully data. But again, if the board and the allocation of where we're providing the training resources are going through this kind of a framework, right? In terms of value, in terms of vision, in terms of aspirational quality, we can train people for jobs that are emerging. And I'm going to get into STEM a little bit later in the education piece. But there's a lot of exciting jobs that you don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree, career technical education, that can create livable wages, apprenticeships. Don't believe the hype about that it's either we have to take everything we can for jobs, or there's no other alternative options. If it's done thoughtfully, it can. I've told you guys before that I want to frame some social issues, and I want to share with you tangible efforts to do something about it. The tangible effort to do something about it, example is with the Air Resources Board. So Penny Newman was involved in this. The city of Riverside, the county of Riverside, UC Riverside Chancellor Wilcox, huge slew of stakeholders advocated for Riverside to be the destination for the Air Resources Board to relocate their facilities. And to be honest, the biggest asset I would say that drove it was really CSER. Here at UCR, Nicole's here from CSER. Probably the most distinguished center focusing on transportation, energy, innovations, and working very closely with the private sector. Very instrumental about dealing with climate change, air quality, things that are fundamentally very critical to this region's future. The role of the environmental justice community and the environmental justice argument to be made on why the Inland Empire should be the place to have this is a very significant thing. And I think this is actually the prelude to what we're doing on the impact side. And I know Ms. Newman was particularly one that framed this conversation. But the idea is really that we as a state are playing a very progressive role in trying to lead climate change, in spite of what the transition was happening at the White House level. But at the end of the day, the state can only be successful if where the growth engine of the state, which is the Inland Empire, is actually playing a very important role in adopting sustainable principles and reducing emissions. The Inland Empire should really be leading the effort. And so I don't want to get a sidetrack, but with the whole carbon trading and the carbon credits system, a lot of the funds associated with that have not been proportionally coming to the region. But this is really where you're going to move the needle. So our goal was, how do we leverage this tremendous asset? We're talking about, once it's fully expanded out, up to like 400 high-wage jobs. Again, focusing on innovation, technology. How can we leverage this as an asset? Going back to here, regional assets. How can we leverage this as a regional asset to attract private industry and investment around us? So this is a tangible effort that is realistic. We call it the Green Team. It used to be called the Stride Force. UC, the county, the city, the chamber, stakeholders, we're all involved in aggressively doing an inventory of what are the existing businesses that are based here, that are interfacing with the Air Resources Board. What are the companies that are currently, the center is right now in El Monte, and they were looking at Pomona and LA County as the alternative option. So it's a big coup. We went up against LA County supervisors, congressional members, and they chose us. So this is a very big coup. But how can we start attracting those businesses around this anchor asset? And this means that whether it's probably not you guys, because we're looking at 2020 for them to launch, but your next generations, and maybe not you guys right now, but when you guys may be looking for a job in a few years, how can we have those high quality jobs for people to have a reason to stay here in Riverside? That's the bottom line. And the beauty of this, again, going back to here, is this aligns with values. This involves with innovation, and it's realistic. It's based on actual infrastructure opportunities that we have. This can spur innovation in terms of entrepreneurship, and we're now starting to look at K12 partnerships too. STEM is obviously science, technology, engineering, math. Those careers are obviously enormous opportunities from an income standpoint as well as from an impact standpoint. How can we connect ARB's relocation to inspire our K-12 system? And so we're looking at some very innovative programs on how we can leverage that as well. So on that kind of space as well, when we're talking about technology, we set up a technology accelerator in downtown Riverside. So I'm one of the founding board members of this. It's predominantly business-led. We do have a seat from the city and the county as well. But the idea really behind this is we want to tap into the innovation ecosystem. We want to foster entrepreneurship and startup environment. And that kind of environment needs culture. It needs a lot of support structure to make it work. But this is a very unique setup that we have. I will tell you, I've attended international conferences on incubators, accelerators. This is a highly unique setup that we have, really anywhere, where you have a true partnership between the city, the county, and the university. Everybody can slap a logo and say they're working together. There's an MOU, which has no substance to it. This is a true partnership. The county has given up prime real estate right across from the county administrative center in downtown Riverside, which for them, they could be getting good rates on that. And they've given us that space to house our tech startup companies, and which is very significant. A lot of times when you hear a government official tell you we're going to start an incubator, they pick a commercial building that nobody's using, and they'll say we're just going to call it that, and hopefully it'll attract more attention. This was a true commitment from the county's perspective. The city has a publicly owned utilities, right? Riverside Public Utilities, which is a huge economic development asset also to attract industries. They have invested in dark fiber infrastructure in the city, so we have very high bandwidth. And so we could potentially attract big data and very innovative tech companies based on that kind of infrastructure. They sponsored that component to the incubator. We're now kind of shifted to an accelerator. And UC Riverside is basically providing an operational support. So entrepreneurship in residence, which provides key mentorship and support, and was also actually managing the incubator itself operationally. So true commitment of resources, true support. It's making a very meaningful impact. There's so many technologies and innovations that come out of the University of California system that are not converted to commercial applications and relevance. And part of what this is intended to do is to capture some of that. And UC Riverside in particular is grossly underrepresented. Has anybody heard of a company called SendGrid? So SendGrid is a commercial email platform. I think at one point they were like 1% of like the entire country's email was going through their technology. SendGrid are UCR graduates, but they're not here. They went to Colorado with an incubator there to get started, to get funded, and to get the support there. And they had no reason to come back. And so we want to prevent things like that, although we have set up one of our exclusive partnerships with SendGrid so that our incubator companies have an opportunity to interface with those kinds of opportunities. But what do you guys think is the main holdup that's preventing entrepreneurial ecosystem in Riverside to flourish? Who thinks it's management, the management of the companies? Who thinks it's capital, access to capital? Are you gonna?
No, capital, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. And so usually it's one of those two that people think of. I'll tell you, it's not capital at all. It's management. Management is something that we seriously lack in this region, and we're talking about a particular type of management. A lot of people have this misperception. If somebody has good experience working as a manager in a large company, that they could potentially go into a startup and lead that company. It's very, very fundamentally different modalities and approaches to how a startup culture is with respect to like an established company management. So, so that's actually our biggest challenge is capital really flows where there's opportunity. In venture capital, Menlo Park in Northern California, that's really kind of the epicenter. But they flow where there's capital. We're making a very compelling argument that for a lot of startups in the Bay Area, the costs overhead are so exorbitant that their money is going purely to overhead as opposed to the basis of the innovation and viability of the company itself. By investing in startups here, they can really mitigate the risk and make a more direct impact. So part of it is an awareness thing though, because they have to know that we exist and that we're doing something. So there is more to it than that, but management is our biggest challenge. We provide operating space, we provide domain expert access, mentorship is key. I mentioned access to capital networks. But this is the kind of environment that's happening in Riverside. Now, this doesn't get a lot of attention, but this is the fundamental blocks that you can build something much more significant on. By no means, again, is this meant to cover everything we need to do. UCR has started a proof of concepts center which is geared towards really the idea stage of businesses. So we're really looking at the whole ecosystem now, from the concept stage to the incubation stage to the accelerator stage, and then they hopefully graduate. And we do as many efforts as we can to help ensure that they stay in the community once they graduate. So these are some examples of some of the companies that are in there right now. And honestly, I'll tell you, the moment we started this incubator or accelerator, I mean, we immediately had quality demand, people lined up. There's so much of a thirst for this kind of an infrastructure locally. There's so much room to grow and scale this effort. But again, this is real tangible impact. It's still, our accelerator is still kind of in its infant stage. It has a lot, it needs to expand a lot more in terms of its own capacity. But this is a really good start, and we're already making a really good impact. There's a lot of companies there. So, what, is it 1:30 that we're supposed to?
Well, we'd like the last half hour at least for questions, so we're
Okay.
going to be that.
So, I'm going to skip to the last portion just so that we cover it. So, this is really my biggest passion, which is equity in education, because at the end of the day, fundamentally, whether you're talking about democracy, talking about being a citizen, talking about raising a family, anything, education is really the cornerstone of it, and this is what really will hopefully bridge the racial inequalities and socioeconomic challenges that plague our society. At the school board level, you can really make a big difference. I know it doesn't get as much attention as a lot of other offices do, but really you can make a tremendous impact there. And I'm very grateful to be a part of an extraordinary institution like Riverside Unified. And my colleagues on the board are very thoughtful. We're very student-centric. We're very nonpartisan in our approach. But our values guide our actions. So we passed the Safe Zone resolution. Regardless of how you guys feel about sanctuary cities, or there's a lot of misunderstandings people have about that. Not one city in the Inland Empire has taken that measure, but at the K-12 level, we can make an impact. Regardless of what people feel about immigration, I think we can all agree that kids did not make those choices, and they deserve an opportunity. So we unanimously passed a resolution, which I've heard has impacted other neighboring school districts to start considering these efforts. Really proud of that effort. We have about 65% of our student population qualifies for free or reduced lunch. We have over 40 languages spoken in our district, very diverse. And I know this issue, I've heard from parents and students, has really meant a lot about where our values and leadership from our school district down is. And really the crux of that is that we don't collect data on immigration status, and we obviously wanted to foster an environment where people of all backgrounds can feel comfortable. The two big things that I wanted to highlight was restorative justice and coding. So restorative justice, for those of you that don't know, it's really dealing with the school to prison pipeline. Unfortunately, there's a real, has anyone seen the movie, the Netflix documentary, The 13? Yeah, if you haven't, highly recommend it. It's very powerful. But this is a very serious issue at the earliest stages of kids' lives. Students of color disproportionately for the same behavior are more likely to get disciplined, and the severity of the punishment of that discipline. And what it does is it perpetuates a cycle from elementary school to high school that leads to suspensions, expulsions, dropout, and then prison. And this is a real phenomenon. And there's real consequences. There's nothing that strips away families and the stigma associated with trying to get back into the workplace and the impact it has on the next generation of kids. I mean, I can go on and on. Incarceration is a horrible thing, and our school system has a role to play in this. And so we have to look ourselves in the mirror and really have an honest conversation. I was very privileged to be involved at the national level on the Coalition for Restorative Justice movement. We were invited to the White House under President Obama's administration to meet with his senior officials. We did this toward the tail end of his administration in the thought that we could coordinate with the transition team of Secretary Clinton, but obviously it didn't play out. But regardless of that, we did get on a national level where we were able to start influencing some Department of Education resources that they started putting out on the internet and disseminating to different states. We worked with the NAACP, Children's Defense Fund, and our district is taking a very direct approach on this issue. We're providing funding to train teachers for unconscious bias. So we're doing very proactive things. This isn't something, this is empty rhetoric. We're looking at alternative forms of discipline. The whole idea behind restorative justice is there's a misnomer that this is being soft on discipline and being lax with behavior. It's actually quite the opposite. When you are working with a student that is forced to confront their behavior and have to reconcile with the people that they've impacted and to provide that service, whether it's through the community, whether it's through the school system, that's true accountability. Those students are actually more engaged as a result, as opposed to the current system, which is just pulling people out of the classroom, alienating them academically and socially, and again, perpetuating a cycle that I don't think benefits anybody. And even from a conservative standpoint, the social costs associated with this are staggering. So to me, this is really a bipartisan issue that can make a tremendous impact. I hear that potentially the Trump administration is open to meeting with us on this, but as of right now, we're working beyond that. We're not going to wait for the federal government. There's a lot of efforts we can do on our own basis. Lastly, on coding, STEM, as you guys know, is very, very significant in terms of the jobs that are involved in this and the quality of industries and the impact that you can make. We at RUSD are playing in a national forefront role on this. More than half of all STEM jobs by next year will be related to coding and computer science. Okay. Right now, over 600,000 jobs are unfilled in this industry because we don't have the skill set. And when you hear about these H-1B visas, people coming from India and so forth, it's because of that skills gap. And so this is a huge national issue of great significance. Being a school board member, I know when I visit elementary school kids that some of the things that we're teaching them, fundamentally by the time they graduate from high school or college, those things completely might not even exist anymore. It's just the reality. Tech, coding, computer science are a little more future-proof, so to speak. And so these are industries that matter a lot. When you have such a huge gap in terms of participation, you have to look at this very systemically. Only 19% of women end up in these kinds of fields, academically and professionally. 19%. And again, when you look into the fact that the scope of the need, we need to start broadening the tent in order to address that gap. And women of color, I mean, we're talking about like 5%. I mean, it's just grossly inadequate. So we're doing a lot of initiatives on this. Our Family Code Night was featured on the front page of whitehouse.gov, again in the Obama administration. But we're going into underserved communities. Parents with their kids are learning coding together. Some of these parents might have be displaced or underemployed. They're learning about coding and find out, obviously there's a spectrum. There's some jobs only for PhDs, some for bachelors, some you don't need it. But the point is there's a spectrum, and so there's a lot of people who can benefit from this. Code.org, our district is the second largest consortium in the country. We have 18 school districts regionally, including even from LA County, that are under our leadership where we're providing training for teachers on embedding coding into the actual curriculum. So it's not a club, it's not an after-school activity, fundamentally incorporated into curriculum from elementary school through high school. And it has benefits of logic and a lot of other aspects. The last thing I'll mention on this specifically focusing on girls and girls of color, is we're doing a lot of innovative things. The founder of Rosen Code nationally is a personal friend of mine. She set up the first partnership as a school district in the country with Riverside Unified. We have girls fully at no cost to the school district or the families. 7-week summer immersion programs that our girls are going, learning about coding. We have a camp that we're just launching in the end of June here at UC Riverside, taught by computer science faculty. It's specifically doing outreach to girls. It's obviously all of our programs are open to everybody, but and we have tons of coding efforts, like I said, for everybody. But a lot of these things are specifically targeting girls, just so that we really start addressing that that gender equity gap. So these are some of the lessons, just generally speaking, that I've learned that might be helpful. And I really, from the things that I shared with you guys, I really want to emphasize what I mean by role of policy. Too often when I hear about people wanting to go into public office, they're focused on issues and ideas and not the process of what it takes to get policy implemented. That the stakeholder involvement, how you're informed in terms of how to shape the policy itself. Policy needs to be evaluated based on its total impact, not just intent. So many times you hear somebody say, well, I did that policy because I wanted to do this. But the actual outcome of that ends up sometimes being very different because we're not measured based on intent, it's based on its actual consequences. So this is something really important to learn. Cross-sector approach. If you notice, a lot of the things I talked about, it involves education community, business community playing a role. Like when I mentioned the homeowner preservation, we have to get private capital for that. Government playing a role. It's cross-sector, and the more that your network as students, that you interface with people from other colleges, other schools, other backgrounds, the more that you can have a more dynamic approach to your career. One of the most understated things in government is the power of office to convene. People are too focused on, okay, I can't get my legislation passed because my colleagues won't support me or this and that. But there's a lot you can be doing that you don't have to wait on others. Like I'll give you an example. That coding effort I mentioned, we didn't have to vote on this in the school board. We didn't ask money from our budget. We raised the resources through the support of UCR, by the buy-in of the faculty. There's ways to work beyond the institutions. And in a climate in our country where you see so much gridlock and partisanship, this is one of the most understated things that all elected officials up and down level, whether you're on a school board or you're the President of the United States, you could be convening and aligning interests to make real things happen. But going really back to the very beginning, the title of my dissertation, Private Partnership for Public Benefit. How can you convene stakeholders towards a social issue and align interests and direct people to making an impact there? Everybody can do that. And even if you're not in government, you can do that. But I'm just emphasizing this because I feel like this is one of the most underappreciated aspects of government. And again, working beyond policy and organizational budgets to make initiatives happen and seeking consensus on values. I don't want to make this into a partisan thing, but I'll tell you, like on the school board, I'm the only Democrat on the board. But I've never led from a partisan standpoint the basis of why anybody should adopt a safe zone resolution or whatever the people should do. I don't need to do that, and I don't need to draw attention by doing rallies or doing things to shame people or to bring attention to something. If you give people the benefit of the doubt and you frame the reasoning for why people should do things based on the values as opposed to some kind of movement or something that they should follow that they might not particularly identify with or resonate themselves. that's a very important thing I want to end with. You guys can stay in touch with me, social media or email. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer the questions.
Can I just take your own questions?
Sure.
So I really like the safe zone resolution that RUSD passed, but UKIPA, which I don't think is too far from here, is going the completely opposite route, and they're working on not even letting unauthorized immigrant children attend school. How can we use your method of cross-sector leadership to combat that, or to try to fight that as an outsider?
So yeah, I think that's a good question. So one is, I think it's going to be deemed unconstitutional. I think legally that's not going to be able to succeed. But regardless of that, part of this is why, like, I feel like we need to be proactive in any community. That phrase, an injustice anywhere is a justice everywhere. We can't, just because you're in a community where you feel like that's not something that can happen, the more that we can espouse and express those values, the more that we can combat those issues. My understanding is they're trying to do a ballot proposition. I mean, obviously, potentially people could organize and try to educate those voters, the counter argument. If you want to directly intervene there, I mean, ultimately they're trying to make it into a democratic process. But I'll tell you, I am skeptical of its legal basis. I don't think that it can fundamentally move forward, even if it somehow gets that kind of support.
Dr. Farooq, well, first I wanted to thank you for coming and sharing the progress of your work. I'm a UCR student right now, but I'm a product of the RUSD school system, and I'm very proud to see that. I went to Longfellow Elementary School, and now they're using computers and tablets to learn how to code. So I never learned how to do that, but it's great that they're doing that. But it's also, I'm excited to see that there's the Excite incubator in downtown Riverside. But I was wondering if by chance, what's the rate of participation or collaboration that maybe engineering or science students here at UCR are having with that incubator? Because I'm telling my friends all the time, like, I like Riverside, but it's sad that students come here to study and then they go to LA or OC because the jobs are out there. So what is the connection or communication that's being had right now between students and the incubator?
So that's great. A couple of ways to answer your question. So I teach entrepreneurial management in the graduate business school here at UCR. So I make sure our students in that context do their projects related to startups and working with real companies and so forth. But we need to do a better job of communicating that. I mean, for Sergio, for students like yourself to physically be in that ecosystem, be exposed to that, interface and learn, there's a lot of value associated with that. I don't think, and I take this responsibility upon myself, I don't think we're doing a good job, and again, that's me included, of creating more awareness about that. So we need to do a better job, but it's like very accessible. So if you have the interest, it's just Google Riverside Excite,
Okay.
Or you can email me, and I'll connect you, with our startups there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What are the biggest challenges for our inland Empire? Maybe too huge. We're just our Riverside. What's the biggest challenges, and how have these challenges changed all the time?
So they have. I mean, I'll tell you, when I was growing up, and for those of you that grew up in this area used to be very conservative, very rural, very different demographics than it is now. So from that standpoint, it's changed. The two counties combined, the population would be the 25th largest state by population in America. People don't realize that. So now it really, and that comes with a market that is very significant from a business standpoint. That comes with votes, so that Sacramento and DC pay more attention to this region for allocation of federal and state funding. So there's a lot of things that comes with, but it comes with challenges as well. And the way that we approach economic development, I think, is very important, and I talked about that in the sense that we have land, and our land has been characterized by some as cheap dirt, but the reality is we should not be thinking from our current generation. We need to be making decisions because land is finite, and land use has consequences once it's taken up. And some industries more than others take up large swaths of land, and the potential jobs, quality of jobs associated with that, and the viability of them in the future and so forth. There's a lot of complications associated with that. So I think, one, from a land use planning standpoint, we need to be thinking multiple generations out. Just because we have that land now and it's cheap now doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. And our goal shouldn't be just to fill up every square foot of property that we can find if it doesn't have intrinsic social, environmental, and economic value. That, I think, is a very pressing issue of our time. And I think from a leadership and a governance standpoint, I think there's a lot of shifts happening. I think you're seeing more progressive values in leadership being involved in different governance circles. And I think the demographic shifts are going to continue to push that. But I'll tell you, at the non-partisan positions, a school board, water board, city council, county supervisors, there's a big gap in those kinds of positions when it comes to some of those progressive values as opposed to the partisan offices. And so I think building up that infrastructure so that people can have a sense of mobility economically and civically to be able to have an impact and be able to be connected to something bigger than ourselves. That, I think, is on that side of everything I talked about. I think that's the biggest challenge. And it's incumbent on all of us to find what role that we can each play in addressing these things. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a sort of a career question for you. How do you organize your time to do all these different things? You know, so how do you live your life to be a businessman and politically active and engaged in all these nonprofits, all these different things? Aside from, I'm assuming you don't sleep. You know, like, so what lessons can you impart about, you know, how you organize your life and do what you do?
So, you can ask my wife.
Be careful.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I know this is going to sound cliche, but I only do things I'm passionate about. And I made it a point very early in my life where I wanted to be in a position where I could have complete control over my time. This was very intentional for me in terms of the choices that I made in life. And it's not something out of privilege, obviously, like I shared with you my background. It's something I had to work very hard for. But one is I made a lot of sacrifices to have control over my time, and I only do things I'm passionate about. I genuinely don't see any distinction between anything I'm doing in terms of that it's some kind of obligation or responsibility. The last thing I would say, which is I think something that we can all really relate to, is that the people that you're working with have to share and buy into that vision and mission. I mean, my wife was with me walking in those neighborhoods when we were doing that effort. If it had to be a mutually exclusive thing, that, okay, if I'm going to do something in the community or I'm going to spend time with my wife, that becomes, those kinds of trade-offs suddenly have real cost to them. But when people are aligned, that helps. In business standpoint, Emmanuel and I, like I said, we're brothers. If there's times where he's pulling a lot more of the weight in terms of some of the aspects of the business that are going on while I'm doing community stuff, he never is like going to call me out on it and say, you know, this is something like where you're not doing your part. We're bought into the goal, and we all have to be in an environment where we support each other to get there. And creating an environment that is supportive of you to perform in that manner is something that I have enormous gratitude for, because it's really a reflection of the people around me as opposed to myself that enable me to do that.
our life waiting to see what opportunity happens to fall in front of us and take advantage of it. And your approach being very proactive and goal-oriented and creating your life around that, I think is probably the best lesson that you could have presented today.
Any other questions?
I'll ask another question. One thing that I thought was sort of interesting was that in these development strategies you've got, business is a big, big player, a big partner. And, we think about sort of like, sort of the stereotypical business person that doesn't want the government involved, doesn't want to be hassled, wants minimal regulation, wants low tax burden, just wants the least government they can get, right? So what have been the ways to get private sector businesses involved in these sort of social entrepreneurship efforts that, maybe it doesn't particularly help their bottom line, or maybe that is the issue, find ways to help their bottom line?
So I think, there's different facets on how to address what you said. So from one perspective, the goal is for it to be aligned with the bottom line. Ideally, obviously, that's where you can really make a tremendous impact. But if not, you focus on everybody, and obviously this does not apply to everybody, but the people, there are a very significant segment of the business community that all of them have some kind of passion that really moves them. And it's really a matter of when you're, as a person, and it's all about relationships. It's connecting with people to what that value and what that purpose is, right? Finding that place with each business leader that you come across. Because when you find that, you don't need to engage them on the full spectrum of everything you're doing. You engage them on the one thing that does matter to them. And at least you've made that much more progress on something. I'm a very pragmatic person. And my whole thing is where we can make progress, we do that. And we might not accomplish everything we'd like, but at the end of the day, we didn't leave any stone unturned. We tried to do different things.
Where do you see the economic development in the next 5 to 10 years for the region? What will be the main driving force? Which industries?
Which industries? So the one that's really, I think, the most critical one is healthcare. Healthcare is going to be, with the baby boomer generation retiring and the significant population that represents, I think that's going to be very important. Our region is very underrepresented in terms of access to healthcare from a variety of different metrics. That's going to be a huge issue. I think advanced manufacturing has an important role as well. It's more technology driven, and so it's not something that's what we conjure up in the old days of pollution and these negative externalities. Tesla is manufacturing in California, for example. So it's more technology driven. I think those two industries are very critical for this region's future.
What advice do you have for potential leaders for the next generation who want to bring about meaningful change in the IE? And what role do you think the School of Public Policy has?
So I think the role of the school itself, I think, is very, very pronounced, right? There's enormous intellectual capital here. You have the luxury, for the most part, I'm saying for the most part, where you have the luxury of dedicating time to thinking, reading, researching, as opposed to the grind of what, if you're not a student, of other things that you have to be concerned with. Harnessing that towards local issues, and identifying those local issues in the community while you're a student and as an institution can really help this community a lot. This community it has tremendous potential, and university can play a major role in harnessing those talents to those types of issues, right? As an individual, what I would say is, obviously finding your passion, but I know that sounds like a very cliche thing, but that's an active process. That's not a passive thing that comes to you purely as an inspiration. but it's actively engaging where anything that even marginally has your interest, you know, going through a discovery process of connecting with those domain experts through faculty or through the community, because as a student, people will be receptive to you. You know, I found, and I'm living proof of it, I showed you guys when I was at USC, all those different things when I was mentioning HUD, all those stakeholders, I was just a student. I would email people and I would say, I'm a student trying to do this. People would be very responsive. Now, once I graduated, it was harder to get those responses. But as a student, people listen. You guys have to take advantage of that. Now, not everybody is going to care, but I'll tell you a lot more care while you're a student than when you're not. And take advantage of that. Be very proactive in the discovery process. And the earlier that you get a real, true sense of what that interest that you might just have piqued, but it's not something you're really sure about, that you get a reality of, wow, it's even more interesting than I thought, or this is not. The earlier you find that out, it's very valuable. So that's what I would encourage, is to be very proactive on things like that. And when you have assignments, no matter how mundane it is, if there's some way you can tie it into something practical, you're helping a nonprofit, you're helping a government program or something, tie it together and do that. It's only going to add value to your life and to helping make a difference.
Earlier you mentioned that the biggest challenge is infrastructure. Actually, that stopped my second question. My question really, from leadership perspective, can you comment on how to build both the physical and cultural infrastructure? I ask this because earlier the students said we have so many graduates each year, but they graduated, they left.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of faculty, we have a job here, but actually many of them, they are living in other places, they commute here. And then we have a lot of discussion talking about today's city is not only about production, it's also about consumption. So what are the, we talk about the social amenities, physical amenities, but here, being in Riverside for 1 year, okay, I even couldn't find a family swimming pool. So my question is, I know we have a challenge here, but from leadership perspective, do we have any plan or any discussion or any future efforts to really work into building this social and cultural and physical amenities?
Well, I mean, I think people are making efforts. The degree of effectiveness of those, I mean, are subjective, right? And I would say, again, putting myself in the conversation, I think we all could be doing more, including myself. But at the end of the day, whether it's the cities themselves, the city governments, we have to work within those institutions at a minimum to try to make that, because the type of efforts you're talking about, I mean, those are things that require institutional resources, right? But at the same time, this is a complicated issue because it has to be approached from multiple angles. The governance and the visionary nature of the people that are in those institutions, they could be influenced by people being more informed about the electoral process, for people to be stepping up that have talent. So it has to be approached from multiple sides. I don't know, that might be the ideal answer you want to hear, but I just think that's the reality of it.
We talked a little bit about where the graduates go to find jobs, but in our area, we're really responding to what the demands from LA and Orange County are as far as warehousing and those low-paying types of jobs. And yet, in the next 5 years, automation is going to be taking over in a lot of industries. And I don't see any of us preparing for people who are in the jobs that can be easily turned over to automation. Preparing people for what's coming, and I think it's going to happen pretty quickly. Do you see
one, I completely agree with you. I know that the spirit behind what you're saying is trying to be addressed. We're trying to dedicate funding resources from a workforce standpoint. We have these rapid response teams where when we see industries making those adjustments, they're leaving, that we connect them and try to retrain or repurpose some of their skills on where they could be applied in something that they could sustain themselves. We theoretically are doing those things. The problem, I think, that speaks more to the heart of what you're saying is there's somewhat a sense of denial over the prevalence and the level of scope of what impact that's going to happen in our region. I don't know if it's going to be similar to like the housing crisis where we were heavily dependent on construction and the real estate industry, but to me it's almost going to be, you know, the scale of the logistics industry in particular, the footprint that it has in the Inland Empire is very concerning. And I mean, when I directly speak to owners in the industry, they're flat out telling me we're going to be automating everything. And but I don't. When you see that, again, from a policy and planning standpoint, the same kind of behavior is still being enabled, then I wonder if there's a disconnect in terms of that reality.
Yeah, I think it's that getting decision makers to start really paying attention to what the industry is going, where it's going, is one of the big gaps. Because they're drawing it here saying they're bringing jobs, and initially there is kind of a spike in those jobs, not good paying jobs, but there's some jobs. But they're gonna be turned over, automated very quickly. The industry is very open about that. So we end up drawing workers here, and then we're stuck with people who then can't get a job anyplace else. And it just seems to be a real lack of awareness on the part of decision makers. That's what we're creating.
No, I agree, and I think fundamentally, and this goes back to the earlier things I said, we have to start thinking beyond one generation, or even beyond, like, even within that one generation, beyond like the immediate next couple of years. Because by nature, if we're doing that, a lot of these, there's going to be more data points that are being factoring and informing people's decision-making process that I think are currently not being factored in. So, well, thank you guys for having me here, and you know, looking forward to following all of your different success. Thank you.